from where. My name's Devon Gillard. I'm the F12.net CMO, and I'm really happy to be joined today by two terrific business leaders. We'll do a little bit of a bigger introduction in a moment, but welcome to Colin Knox, CEO and founder of Gradient MSP, and to Alex Webb, CEO and founder of F12.net. So as those of you who've tuned in before know, we try to every month to bring topics that are relevant to the businesses we serve. Sometimes they're about technology, and sometimes they're about topics that we run into that our clients are asking about that seem to be in the air, and we want to bring a perspective to it. And, you know, surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, we keep hearing about this topic of work from where. Some businesses are exploring and challenged and trying to figure out working entirely remotely. Some are doing hybrid environments, and some are taking a move to bring everybody back to the office, to draw a line in the sand, and to really say that in order for our business to be successful, we have to pivot away from the COVID mentality to a new mentality. This all involves all sorts of really interesting aspects: culture, productivity, recruitment, onboarding, mentorship, technology, all, and that's just to begin to scratch the surface. So to help me in this discussion, I'm joined by Colin Knox. Colin, I'm just going to introduce you this way.
Sure.
I feel like I've been in your shadow for almost 20 years. But about that long ago, I started with a company, and right when I joined, I was filling a role that Colin used to have, and I heard day after day that Colin was this great guy. Colin was amazing. Colin was terrific. And I know all those things to be true. They were always said in sort of a way that maybe I wasn't quite up to Colin level. So I'm going to give you, that's the best, warmest introduction I can provide to anyone. Colin, tell us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind, and about Gradient MSP.
Besides being great, no. Yeah, so I've kind of been around for a good while. I worked at an IT company that you had quickly followed me and filled my spot at when I left on there. Worked at and scaled another IT company until I founded my own. Grew that so good that you guys decided that, hey, that might be a good fit for you guys to expand in Calgary and a bit in Edmonton. I went on to found and run a cybersecurity tech startup that we grew and scaled really quickly, and ended up selling that business off to SolarWinds, and now, yeah, we're kind of running a new tech company that's focused on kind of transforming the way that technology is consumed and delivered by IT providers like F12.
Well, thanks very much, Colin. And I think it's a great background. And one of the reasons I was really excited that you were willing to join us in this webcast, because I know you and I know that you speak truth. So we're going to get an unfiltered, unvarnished presentation of your perspective. But you've been a serial entrepreneur. So bricks and mortar are no stranger to you. You've built successful businesses. Traditionally, my understanding is you had an office in all of your other business ventures that was kind of central. Tell us a little bit about how Gradient's been different in that respect.
So spent and the first company definitely went through the full office build process at that company. The last company we did an office, and then we did a build out in the tail years in downtown Calgary and stuff. But after going through those processes and all the stress and everything that came with it, I'd always said if we do another company that we won't do an office, and that was a mindful, purposeful, decision. Obviously, that was courted along and enforced by founding a new business and during the pandemic and in a time where we weren't even allowed to work from an office. But we've kind of held true to that, and it's going really well. I mean, it's awesome. It's a nice day today in Calgary. I can sit outside and enjoy that. So far so good on how it's gone for us, and we're being very mindful about our approach and making sure that doesn't hinder but can actually promote the success and growth of the company.
Fantastic. So we're going to come back and kind of explore what you found has helped you be successful, not just to move a company remote, but actually to found one, grow one, hire, recruit. I think there's just all sorts of aspects I'd love to dig in there. But I'm going to bring in Alex Webb, F12 CEO, to the table here. Alex, I think, what are we, 20 some years in 25, 27 years in business now, number of locations. Tell us a little bit about your experience with F12, and maybe if you wouldn't mind quickly summarizing F12's experience with the work from where models.
Yeah, thanks, Devon. Yeah, as I was listening to Colin sort of talk about this, it's certainly an envious sort of opportunity to explore as to this work from anywhere. But for us, when I think about sort of our journey, we're 10 locations, 220 people sort of around the country, and ultimately, when I think about bricks and mortar, you want to sort of maximize that opportunity because you have to have it to a certain level. But ultimately, it's a place where people come to meet and collaborate and to engage with clients and to really sort of tackle, bigger issues and ultimately create. And I think for F12, it was a real big part of our culture is that sort of coming together, even to the extent where we would use our facilities for events and host, good size events for clients and vendors to come together. And ultimately, I think it built the fabric of who we were. So of course, for us on that journey to through the pandemic was a bit shocking because, you had this sort of structure and then it was ripped away overnight. March 17th, it was gone, and we ultimately had to react. And we weren't ready, to be honest. I mean, we didn't have a phone system. That phone system was built into the bricks and mortar. The methodologies by which we cultivated people and organized ourselves was all about having a place to come to. And so we had to really sort of fast track our thinking and as a lot of businesses did. And that digital transformation for us was sort of an eye-opening experience. And I remember thinking in those early days is imagine if we could just operate remote, or at least a good amount of the business operate remotely. And what would that look like from a productivity? Like what could we gain? We could save the drive time. And so all of the normal things that people went through, we went through. But what we found is while we sort of really propelled in some areas, it started to retract quickly for our organization in what I would call sort of outcome productivity. And the first thing I noticed wasn't just with F12. I noticed it with getting our audit done. Something as easy and as systematic as getting a financial audit done, it took much longer to do it with our accounting firm. And because that accounting firm had to sort of wait for things, and they would try to use the system, and they would get on, and they'd send a note, we need this, versus when they were in the office, they could just, quickly move from item to item and sort of really collaborate quickly. And I would estimate it took 30 or 40% longer to just do our audit than it normally did. And so for me, that was a first sign where I started to see outcome, but only because I had the relativity of before and after. Then I started to see the same thing in our organization. It's not that people weren't working harder or, in like they are. I would argue people remotely were working harder, but what the product that they made, Devon, was not, it wasn't as easy to obtain. It took longer to do, and there was more impediments to the success of that. So the productivity loss was just things took longer to do. And then ultimately, you already have sort of an engagement and it's already priced to your client. So it's very difficult to sort of put those things together. When somebody's working harder, but the outcome isn't as good, that's a hard quotient to deal with. Mm-hmm. And so, going forward, when we started to come back in a bit of a hybrid world, the actual productivity gains were very noticeable in our organization. So I sort of prime it with that it's, yeah, I'll hand it back.
I think that sets the stage. We have an avid, successful advocate, Colin, if you don't mind me calling you that, for the work from home, work from anywhere model. And Alex, F12 did we could never entirely work from home because we had folks that had to go and service our clients. We have warehouses, et cetera. But we had a pretty large portion of our workforce and had to pivot to a hybrid model. And I want to let the audience know, I spoke to a couple of CEOs who have gone the complete full-on, bring everybody back to the office, insist hardline. And I invited them to join this discussion. But I got some really insightful comments about why they did that, about their view on the culture. They shared those with me, but they weren't comfortable being the face of the come back to the office. One commented, I thought very wisely, I didn't want to be Elon Musk and become the face. But what I'm going to do is play a little bit of devil's advocate as we debate this idea and challenge some assumptions. One of the first ones I want to ask is, there's work in the office and there's some collaboration and benefits of that. There's work from home. Is hybrid just a purgatory for an organization that hasn't yet admitted that either one or the other is the model that they should embrace? Thoughts on that?
Go ahead, Colin.
I don't know. So we'll speak candidly.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting. I think it's telling in itself that nobody in the full work from home or full work back in the office wanted to come and stand up on the call today. I think some hybrids are almost kind of like a purgatory, because in some cases it was people not having the confidence to try to force their staff all to have to come back into the office, and so this was their kind of concession, and not something that they're thrilled about or whatever. And in some cases, I think it depends on what the business does and what each role is. Like if you're in manufacturing, there's no way you can do work from home, and that was
Totally.
Elon Musk. We can't build cars from home, right? But
and then what you say, Colin, and that's the interesting point, if you don't mind my interjecting. Although obviously everyone understand the shop floor couldn't.
Yeah.
I think the other part they have to wrestle with, this becomes about what sort of organization you have. Okay, what about all of those who could? Is it damaging to the corporate culture to have a special group that gets a privilege where they can't, or does the business decide, listen, we've got to be all one thing?
I don't know. I think that's maybe where I'm a little bit more shrewd, is if you work in a certain role or function and that's what you've kind of dedicated your life to and your career to, there's creatures of consequence on that, right? If you're a trades focused person and we need millions of them in the world, you have to go on site to do your job, right? Like that's just the nature of what it is. I personally think it's unfair for some people that maybe don't want to be in the office and can be more productive outside of the office and working from home, that they would have to go in. I think having been 2+ years now and what's become the new status quo, there's costs associated with having to go into the office, and that's there's financial burden, but then there's also what you're now having to give up from your family life and your home life, of that time in the car heading there, the being able to have breakfast with your kids or take them to school and pick them up from school and stuff like that you'd concede on. But yeah, I think having flexibility is good. But in our case, it's don't apply for the job if you're one of those people that really wants to be working in an office, because we will never have an office. And so we kind of weed out and filter out certain applicants and candidates for various roles as a result of that, because that's just something that we're committed to and is part of our culture and structure.
That's a good point. Alex, I'm sure you've got some things you want to add in here.
No, nothing at all, Devon. I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach, because I feel like there's some elements that are going to be sort of missing, at least for our organization. And one for certainly is that sort of jealousy or missing out. Some people in the office, some people not. But where I really probably see it is in the earlier development phase of somebody's career. And when I talk the 20-somes that are going to learn presentation skills, gaining confidence, the mentorship that they sort of require in those early, that first career, people just out of college, because I certainly see people that are skilled, that have been in and they could almost grab a laptop, work in a Starbucks or work in an office, and if their job allows them to do that ultimately, but I don't think they get there overnight on their own. I feel like all of us, we required some, you learn presentation skills by standing in front of an audience. That's very difficult to just do in a remote, in a remote world, or standing in front of a client isn't something that comes easy. You want to be able to practice with other members of your internal team in order to sort of gain that. So what I saw missing in the COVID time when it was happening is those skills were eroding for some folks, but for other people, they never really were able to get them. And there's a lot of over the shoulder sort of mentorship support that sort of goes, those relationships that you build. I know for me personally, I think one of the biggest things is that, when we were working remote, winning didn't feel the same remotely as it did live. Now, this is one that I couldn't personally conquer. When I would win, or we'd accomplish it, we won a good client, or we acquired a company, just the high five, like it still was happening during COVID, but it didn't feel the same way. And I could never ever figure out through this simulation ultimately the outcome. So for me, it sort of met, and going back to a full on in office, because I really enjoyed that flexibility. Because for me, flexibility came as, being able to drop kids off in the morning at school, to, staying home when you're sick, so we're not, infecting the whole office. Like, these were some really cool benefits that I think came out of COVID, and that I personally wanted to preserve going forward, so we could hit the ultimate in productivity with the flexibility, but still not lose that mentorship and support for new people coming into this industry. And those were hard things to answer with just going full remote. So that's where I'll leave it.
By the way, I'll just mention, anybody listening, feel free to ask questions as we go, and I'll seed them as they come up. Excellent perspective, and it makes me, Colin, I've witnessed Gradient MSP grow very rapidly since your launch. Maybe you could let us know how many employees you have, roughly speaking, right now. How many are on the team?
Yeah, so I think we're at 53 right now, and 40 of those have come on in the last 6 months. In varying levels, yeah. Right? From senior executives to people right out of college. I think we've got 4 or 5 that have come in right out of college. So yeah, I can definitely appreciate some of the sentiment there. For how we focus on our culture, we're very, very considerate of how we can do things like the celebrations and stuff, right? Like, we have channels in Slack that are dedicated to that, and we make sure that we've got, call out forums, and we make sure, and we do a weekly full town hall in our, virtual atrium or auditorium where we can do that, and we can celebrate, and we can, share things off. And then, for our organization, we do annual corporate retreats. So we bring everybody out to a certain location for a week. So we're actually all heading to Newport Beach in September to take everybody out there for some of that in-person stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think, again, I think it depends on the role when it comes to the mentorship side of things, right? We're able to foster water cooler areas where people can co-work together, full video, sound, everything else, having that training. And personally, I think when I look back to my own growth, like the top growth that I saw, the mentors that I had were more on a regular cadence where I could meet and talk and get that feedback. And I think the ones where I felt somebody was almost always watching me or always over my shoulder is where I was too scared to F up, and then just kind of went and said, okay, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And I think in those cases, they may have thought, like, this person's not progressing the way that I thought they would. They're asking so many questions, whereas they, in our remote organization, they have, immediate access to anybody that they do need help or answers or assistance or feedback from. But they've also got that freedom of, being able to try things and test things and sample stuff, so that, we can help build up their confidence as they go through it.
I picked up a couple of really key points, Colin. I'm just going to repeat them back. And one thing was to be deliberate about creating spaces where collaboration happens. You talked about using technology, so people are working, but they're actually in a live environment.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, the nightmare might be a strong word, but the experience a lot of folks had during COVID was Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, back to back to back to back to back. Heaven forbid you could fit in a bathroom break somewhere in there. Very little time just talking. Everything was agendized. Everything was, and that didn't leave space for some of the sinew, I would argue.
Yeah.
What's really interesting about what you're talking about at creating MSP is, deliberate mentorship that's scheduled and planned, and then places using technology where people can meet together. My rejoinder to your question is, given your experience and your success, what are your thoughts about what sort of an organization, what does an organization have to be like to be successful in the work from home model? And what, other than obviously those who have to work in manufacturing, what sort of organizations would you, based on your experience, say, stay away, it's probably not going to work for you?
I think it comes down to a lot of diligence, right? Both organizations have security compliancy certifications and stuff, and you don't always do that for the marketing aspect of it. You do it because it makes good sense, right? And there's a lot of things, and you should be compliant with a lot of these things, regardless of if you're going for the certifications or not. And I think it comes to the same with how you're running the business, right? It makes good sense, and you can't be successful in a remote and distributed organization if you're not diligent with your people and culture, right? If you don't have a proper, job scorecarding, goal setting, OKRs type methodology and process in your business, it will not succeed, because everybody's running around haphazard doing whatever they think is most important to them or whatever they want to work on, right? So as long as you're very diligent in making sure that there's alignment across your entire organization and across all functions of what are the top level objectives, what are the functional objectives, and how are those all in alignment across the organization, which focuses down to what you should be working on. And then when it comes to individual performance, feedback, coaching, and everything else, having a structure and cadence and kind of method around that to make sure that you're following and you're adhering to that. And that takes a lot of times a very strong champion inside the organization to drive it, to make sure that they're coming back to each executive saying, have you finished your OKRs? Have you finished your scorecards? Have you done your reviews? Have you are you working along? What are the goals for each role and stuff? So it comes down to making sure that that's all strongly communicated and doing it. The next is, we're a very transparent organization, right? We will share everything across the organization. And I think that helps the entire business understand where we're at, what we're working towards, why, and how we're going to do it. So there are a lot of organizations, and for various reasons, that are very closed off on that stuff. It's, we told you what you have to work on and what you need to do, now go do it. And I think organizations like that may not thrive in a fully remote organization where they can't be watching all the other stuff that's going on, right?
It's so deliberate, hey, because I think a lot of visionary leaders got there because they bring enthusiasm and they have a lot of incidental management. And then as you graduate, and I think the lesson I'm hearing, for work from home, nothing can be very little can be left to incidental. It's got to be deliberate, or it's not going to happen. Alex, I'm going to turn the question on you about hybrid. What sort of an organization would you recommend explore hybrid, and what would be like, no, this is not going to work for you?
Well, I think it's sort of naturally, when I look at sort of the business, and I think if you can operate fully remote, it's going to be a certain type. I mean, if there's elements of the business that have to be done with bricks and mortar, because you have to receive products and rack and stack and do all of these things, it's going to be very difficult to do that from your house. I was telling the story, when I started this business, I built the business starting in my basement. I received a shipment of monitors that filled my living room and my kitchen. And at that point in time, I was told I needed to find office space because it just doesn't work. And so I think if the business naturally has some elements where you have to have it, then you're going to have to address that. If you could get away, outsource all of those things perhaps, or really sort of think about the structure, but the business design has to be congruent. And, and I look at, you can't be an ambulance service from, on a work from home. So you're, those kinds of businesses are ultimately, we're going to be bricks and mortar. We're going to need to have the facility and we're going to need to do it. So for me in a hybrid, I think if you have both universes, which F12 does, we have a big, strong element. We manage thousands and thousands of assets. We manage equipment coming in all the time, projects people are picking up. So we have to monitor all of the things that Colin would bring up as far as, the OKRs and really collecting and really driving efficiency in the business and ultimately to get the delivery that you need. But there's an element where you got to go, and if you have to drive here anyway to pick up a van to go, move product there, you just almost want to build that in, because what I've learned is routine is really key to success. If you can create routine at some level, ultimately you're going to get some success, and that's very difficult to do in a remote. So, but that said, everything from sales and remote support, these are all things that can be done remotely, and maybe arguably some should in absence. So I think if you're the type of company that has both, I think a hybrid fits very well. But I think you have to be very careful on how you structure that, because I don't think flexibility means you work in an office these 3 days and these 2 days you don't. It might mean for 5 days you're here and then for 5 days you're not, because it's actually better. Or, you need to come in at 9 and you actually work a little later because it's better that if you grab these things into the evening, or you just came off a long travel schedule. So for me, flexibility goes beyond where you sort of presently work. And in a multi-office environment, it might mean you're working in this office or that office or another one down the road. So I think we like to get to this more simplistic. I work here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and there on Thursday, Friday. So
and I'm thinking, Colin, obviously you started your business deliberately, remotely, building the OKRs, the KPIs, the metrics, the clarity of purpose. And Alex, thinking about our own journey, I think the trauma would have been much greater for us if we were still a single site organization. By virtue of being multi-site, and then when you departmentalize your job functions, you already have to have layers of accountability. Whereas I could just remember the days of being in a small business when so much was run based on not maybe well, but based on my gut and reaction that day and what I was seeing and feeling. And so the feeling, I did want to ask one thing, and this might be peculiar to the type of business. One of the CEOs I talked to said, Devon, our business is like yours in this respect. We have employees that get called when there's difficulties happening, when there's complaints happening, when there's concerns, let's say customer service representatives. And he said, although they expressed they were happier, he noticed a mental health challenge with that group throughout the pandemic, being at home and not being surrounded by camaraderie when they might be taking in negativity. And he said he saw an immediate bounce back when that group was brought together so they could commiserate, collaborate, lift each other up, and share that experience. It was an aspect I hadn't thought of, and I hadn't heard anybody put it quite that way about the, Colin, Alex, any credence to that? Does that resonate? Yeah. Is that something to 100%. Consider or not?
Yeah, and I think that's when I called it the over the shoulder, I probably maybe should have elaborated a little bit on what that meant. And that really is just the support in that moment when somebody just blasted you. And what you need as a human being, you just sort of took this blow. And we saw the same thing, mental health toll was increased in the remote environment with the sort of, I think for those reasons, Devon.
And that might be peculiar to help desks.
Yeah.
Curious, Colin, what your thoughts are. You've run help desk before. You have a different business now.
Yeah. So I think there's a few, it always comes down to being deliberate and making sure that one, you have, and it's gentlemen that I worked for a long time, it was like, never find a tool to solve your problems, start with the people and the process and then find the tool that fits and goes along with that. Right.
Nice.
And I think we've always been focused on that for us. And before this, so we started by the pandemic or during the pandemic and everything. So, we started with 0 and grew through that. But I worked at and was an executive at a business where our business unit was 1,200 employees spread across 19 cities around the world. And before that, I would say it was difficult. And there's a lot of what you might see and what's actually true, going back to that one individual's comment that you mentioned there, right? Like, it's amazing how many things can be fabricated to look on the outside like, hey, we're happier, we're better, we're good and everything. And then all of a sudden you get in the car and you're saying all these things about the drive home and everything else, right? Like, I think there's varying degrees of reality and everything. And there are some people that absolutely thrive in an environment where you're surrounded with other people and you're around them, right? And so we knew that would be a thing for us. And so we made sure that as we built our virtual office and environment for, how people are able to work and collaborate and just be around other people, we were very purposeful around that in selecting the solution, and then even how we designed that office space to be able to work for us virtually and remotely. I think it again comes down to employee check-ins. I mean, technology has evolved to such a place now where we're presenting to how many people, and we're two of us are in the same city, one isn't right now, and it's allowed us to do so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like with video conferencing and the quality of cameras and audio equipment and everything else, you can really connect with people now and talk to them. And I'd say, as it pertains to getting feedback, and part of our culture is like, it's open feedback, give us whatever. But everybody talked before about keyboard courage, right? Like, if I'm not face to face with somebody, it's whatever. And that slowly has evolved to just like the video conference courage. People will say things to you over a video call that they will not say to you in person, face to face.
Well, I think the internet proves that people are more liberal on the internet.
They are, right?
Yeah, true.
And your greatest critics are going to drive your greatest growth. And so if that's external, great. You know what? When you get lit up on support or whatever else, like, take that feedback, but connect with those people. Like all of our support calls, when we have a support call, it's full video call with our customers, right? And every time we're doing any meeting, like, everybody turns their videos on for all the meetings. We want, when we present and share good news, we want to see everybody's faces and reactions and stuff like that, and be able to give that feedback and collect feedback that we think maybe somebody was holding out of in a group forum. But yeah, I think, being able to get that level of candid feedback internally to drive the business is going to be great. I mean, how many times and I know we all on this call for sure have, how many times have you let an employee go and then you relayed that to some other people on the team and they go, oh my God, like, that
Thank
took
goodness.
you long enough.
Yeah, like, what were you waiting for?
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Now you get that feedback. I don't think this person is the right person for that role or whatever
Which
else.
is always a sign of a really healthy
and you get
culture,
it, right?
hey? Yeah,
absolutely. And everybody's bought into the success, and that goes back to those objectives, right? We've got the set objectives and metrics of what the company is looking to achieve long term, 1 year, quarterly, monthly, and stuff like that. And if somebody now feels that something is encumbering our, as a group and team, ability to achieve that, they bring it up. And then we have, whether it's a crisis meeting or whatever, to discuss how do we work around that and how do we solve it. But yeah, I think technology has provided so much for us. You definitely could not have done this even 10 years ago.
Well, couldn't have done it 10 years ago. Yeah. And I'd also think it's safe to say, Colin, that because you were, born in this environment, the deliberate work from home, you filtered for people who see themselves as being successful. You mentioned earlier that not everybody might be of such a makeup that this is the right thing for them. Yeah. I mentioned the being at Solar Winds, and Alex had mentioned earlier the feeling left-outedness of not being in the office or whatever. Holy crap, did we see that at Solar Winds as an in-office company with 20 major offices around the world. Like, time zone changes mean people aren't always in the know of what's going on, right? There was always the rally office gets better treatment or whatever, and they get all the news first, or this office or that. And it actually drove an us versus them mentality, where each city and each office was kind of like, this is us. Like, we don't let other people in, and we're courteous when they come and visit and stuff. But it actually drove a more disparate culture and stuff. And then, you looked at additional costs. Like, we would do worldwide tours, flying to every office, day after day, to meet with people and share things and talk. And, I think, if anything else, we wanted to make sure that wasn't what we ended up having to deal with, that everybody can convene in the same space. I mean, we're
I hear about crazy stuff all the time. We do these virtual donut things where this app randomly selects two people in the company who don't work together and who haven't had a lot of combined meetings together. And they say, hey, you two need to have a virtual donut meeting and get to know each other. And so it coordinates that and you get on. And so I was on with one of our, a person on our people team, and we were talking and I said, hey, that's it. Like, I see a different background for you this time. Like, did you move to a different room in your house for your office, or what's going on? And she's like, no, I've been in India for the last few weeks as we're planning our wedding, and I didn't have to take time off to go plan my wedding and do this travel. She's been in India and she'll be there for like the next 5 weeks yet she's still able to work and stay in the know and do all of her stuff. We had another person on the team with a similar thing. They worked from Hawaii for 3 weeks, right? Like, not having to take vacation and keep going. And, we're on the verge of hiring our first employee over in Brazil right now. But it's just been very interesting to see how, with the way we've been able to convene our office and pull it together, people do work unusual hours now. And that's the other interesting thing, is they're not guided by the 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 or whatever else, right? We have some people that, and we don't care, as long as the work's getting done, work when you want. So I'll pop on to do some emailing or something and sit in the office, and you'll see people walking around the office and doing their thing and having meetings and doing whatever. And, it gives them that flexibility to do it, but they always have like certain places and times and that routine that Alex mentioned of, this is when we do our all hands, and this is, the cadence of meetings and functional meetings and follow-ups. So
time for a bit of a different counterpoint, if I may. So I'm gonna
we're losing you.
Your audio
You're a
is
robot,
you're robotic.
Oh, this headset does that. Just a sec.
I thought the Transformers took over for a second.
Yeah.
Is this me? Or?
Do we have you, Devon?
Just waiting for the reconnection.
Yeah. Just a second.
Well, I think we can, yes, certainly in the context of deliberately building sort of all of those things. And I think it's the design of the pandemic, and we saw the same, in the power that we gained during this to have more ability to do things has been incredible. And I'd say, we've heard it a number of times that, the amount of digital transformation that occurred during the pandemic was 10 years worth accomplished in 6 months. And, we saw a lot of apprehension for people to even go on to things like Teams and, just the basic. And, Colin, I personally think it's, it's great, some of the things that you're doing and some of the things that you're invoking. But for me, the only, there's still a lot of queuing that you get sort of live, and obviously you get together on an annual basis, but for, again, when I go back to those skills of individuals learning sales and standing in front of the client and going on site, your business doesn't do a lot. You don't have any need. You're supporting clients all over the world and ultimately in multiple time zones. So you don't have that sort of direct need. So I just
I'm learning how to.
Yeah, no, for sure, right? And in ways we do, and in ways we don't. So we do a lot of in-person conferences that we sponsor and speak at and sell out, and that that's how we get those things, and get a lot of customer awareness and stuff. And in those cases, the team is coming together, right? We've got 8 people right now, I think, in Las Vegas at a major industry event, and so kind of every month we're at anywhere between 2 and 5 events. So they get that in-person stuff on that team, and then we cycle through. So we have people from our RevOps and our success teams actually out at that event this week too, so that people from different functions do get out and cycle through and see some of that stuff. But you're right? We're not in the situation like you guys. We're not hopping on somebody's computer and having to troubleshoot and be on the site and everything else, because our stuff is all digital for what we support and how we connect with people. But it's again, it comes down to the service that you deliver and what your business is, right?
And that's why I feel there's not one size that fits all here. I think it's really sort of building structure around what it is that how you need to be and where you can find your top performance, and really sort of lean into that. And for some companies that'll be, I have to be in the bricks and mortar. only because they probably find in those businesses there's maybe only 5% of the roles that could be done remotely, and you don't almost want to create that sort of total polarity within the organization. Devon, are you back?
I'm told my mic's not coming through the right mic, so forgive me, everybody. We'll go through good old Bluetooth. There's a question I wanted to ask Alex. If a business leader has determined that they believe they need to get people into the office, could be because they're the kind of person that functions the best and they want to be surrounded by that. And I think the energy and the enthusiasm of the business leaders just as important as at least should be factors into other occasions. Share with the group your experience, because F12, a lot of folks were working remotely, and then there was a very few people are able to work exclusively remotely. There was a hybrid approach. That didn't go over well by everybody. It had become used to, as Colin said, all of the flexibilities and benefits of maybe never coming into the office over the last 18, 24 months. Share your experience with that and what advice you might have for business leaders that are struggling right now with pivoting their business back into an office environment.
Yeah, and it wasn't emotional because of, certainly from the energy. I do like being around people, but there are times when I can get more done if I'm not. And, we're also in an open office environment for most of F12's offices. So it's very open. So it's ultimately, that I get some energy, but that really wasn't the principal reason behind for us to go into a hybrid versus, try to continue to really drive the remote. It was really outcome oriented in my view. We weren't as good as we were. And we weren't as good as we were in many categories of the business. And we tried many things. And in the early days of the pandemic, there was a heightened, but people were working and they had nothing better to do. I mean, they're working 12 hours a day. I don't know what it would like to be in Hawaii competing with the beach, but I feel like there's certainly going to be, that would be a challenge. But for us, we had many years of metrics to really get an understanding of what an outcome should look like, how long a ticket should be, how long it should take to switch a password, how long. And when those things started to get bigger and longer to do, you knew that there was something wrong. And the behavioral management of that, you could only go so far because there was just some impediments that weren't the responsibility of the individual. It was just sort of the nature of it. Now, could you get to the other side of it? Possibly, but I think that's going to need a little bit more time, better tooling, better visibility, better knowledge of what you're working on. And I just know for an organization, you sometimes just can't fight it. You have to go, you know what, we could still give all of those benefits of flexibility, but ultimately there still is a job to be done. And we heard all of the stories, Devon, from people that move 2 hours away because, to move to a cheaper house and all of that. And certainly we're sensitive to that. And I still see that there is a place for remote, but when it has to be really pick and choose depending on the way the business is formed. So now, if you ask me, would I build a remote only business if I could? I've struggled with this equation. I guess probably the answer is yes, because ultimately you save on office and you get, and I know that we're going to get, but that comes at the caveat that there are so many parts of this world that just don't work from that fashion. There's many businesses that just will not be able to. So you're going to limit your opportunity on the type of business that you're ultimately going to run. So that would be my feedback on that topic.
There's a lawyer, Levitt, I think his name is. He writes in the National Post all the time, really great articles about employment law and all the rest. And I know their law firm, when they did a study, they found that everyone reported higher productivity, but when they measured it by billable hours, it was down 15% across the firm. And so, his article goes, that was, talking to the GTA and other law firms, that was the general experience, and they forced people back. And it was interesting to me because law would be, I would assume, a role that would be amenable to a work from home environment where you're a knowledge worker and thinking. I don't know why that is. I don't know if the social sciences figured that out. Yeah, it's interesting.
Accounting, law, service desk, like all of these things are all this, like they're similar, but yeah, and I've heard the same, and we've experienced like that same experience on productivity output, but maybe we're just premature on the tooling.
I I think it comes down to, being willing and open to considering some different approaches to stuff too, right? Like that law firm thing, that sounds to me like an industry that's ripe for disruption then, right? If you are still so focused on billable hours as a business, in the shift globally to a consumption-based world and different approaches
as
to
a
stuff.
service models and all that
Exactly.
sort of
It's
stuff.
everything as a service now. And you see some of that disruption even locally. You have Good Lawyer who is now doing flat rate legal services on demand and stuff, right? And I think, the people that may approach some stuff with a finite scope, again, there will always be certain services and businesses that you need to have, at the very least, a hybrid deployment model on. But look at the opportunity ahead of you from a global economy standpoint, right? Uber didn't set out to just become a transportation company in San Francisco, right? And there may be some moral and ethical challenges with how they got to where they got, but I think we'd all be lying if we didn't say they truly transformed the world of transportation globally. I've traveled the entire world and never had to rent a car, never had to hail a cab, never had to anything, right? And never had to pay with a credit card, like physically or hand cash because of that, right? So I would look at that from the legal standpoint and any kind of other service, where you can deliver things remotely is look at the opportunity versus the restriction, right? And I remember, like, even at Excel, which you guys got, like, we were supporting people on other sides of the world in North Africa and doing services with them, right? Now you look at how much technology has even evolved since then, right? What can you open yourself up to as a global economy, as a talent pool, right? Like I know we're unusual hiring the amount of people we've been able to hire over the last little while. That's because we weren't strictly focused on, we have an office in Calgary, let's hire everybody in the Calgary area, right? Like we're across, I think, 20 cities now across North America. And been able to bring on some of the best and brightest people in those roles as a result. So yeah, we'll concede and have compromised on certain things in the business and even for what we're able to do. But it's also forced us to be innovative in how we approach the services that we deliver, how we interact and engage with internally and externally, and look to drive the business for what we see as a much larger opportunity.
Listen, we're at the end of this, and I think, Colin, you just wrapped up and gave like a sermon, a beautiful sermon, endorsing the work from home model and its benefits on a global perspective, both in terms of recruitment and the opportunities for the business. And Alex, I'd just like to afford you the last opportunity here. If you'd like to give, your pitch or your sermon, if you will, on why a hybrid model and having folks in brick and mortar locations is something businesses should strongly consider in this day and age with all the technology.
Well, I think, I go back to this sort of idea that, if your business needs to have the bricks and mortar, you're going to want to maximize the bricks and mortar to at least some level of value, and create that sort of local community and really sort of drive that coming together. And ultimately, I think there's benefits still in society to bring people together, and not negating the fact that one has a bigger reach out, and we could outsource into other countries across the board. You could put your workforce all in another country, but I feel like there's still a need for communities to feel locally supported and understood, and to be part of, I go to school and my kids are at this, and they're on the same soccer team, and I still feel that sort of connection to community is a big part of why hybrid still has a place in the market. And so for us, I think really capturing the benefits of what remote can give you, so that you can work from the lake or all, you could really check in, and it could be for 2 weeks at a time. Like I said, I don't think it needs to be 3 and 2 days. This isn't what hybrid really should be. I think where it just makes sense to use the coming together of the facilities that you have as a place of collaboration, a place of education, a place of support, and really on that development side. And when being ready for people on their career, when they're really ready to transcend, and they're ready and they can sort of take those privileges of working remote, because I feel probably a little bit more responsible to educate people in early that out of school education. Those are the hardest years that I think they need to be around some people. I think when I go back to the way this pandemic, if education could be done remotely, I would still think the schools would have opted to do it remotely. and because it's cheaper. We could get rid of all the schools on the planet, but yet they still, on the post-pandemic, went back to bringing people into school. So, being educated remotely has a value and it can fill a void, but I don't think it's everything. So for me, I still think hybrid will be here for a bit. And, but ultimately I would say, consider it if you're if you're going to go full bricks and mortar, probably hybrid. It's not purgatory. It is I think, going to be a business structure going forward.
Well, good. Well, we've got some notes for some business leaders who've joined us from other organizations. I really enjoyed the discussion. I really think Colin and Alex, you both did a great job representing different experiences and viewpoints and what it takes to be successful. There's from F12 side, there's a technology aspect, Colin, that you were talking about now. Really, some of what we're doing, that you're doing, can only be done in the modern world, and that's a gift that we can embrace if we seek it. Thank you both very much for joining us today to explore this conversation, and to all of our guests that joined us. If you have any further questions, ping Alex. I know he's available. Colin, I'm sure you don't mind the odd interaction.
Absolutely.
All right, great.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and to explore the different technologies and techniques that it takes. I'm just getting a ping here. I'm getting noted that there's a couple of questions I may have missed in the comments. One was about how many staff you had during the pandemic. You addressed that. Before the pandemic was 0. The other one was, I think we explored already, about whether the type of company you have, transactional versus services, makes much of a difference. So no, I feel like we've answered the Q&A in the course of our conversation. With that, I'll let you both go with my appreciation for the conversation today. Take care.
All right. Thanks,
Devon.
guys.
Thanks, Colin.